What's up guys, I'm here with my Destruction Warlock DPS guide for Legion pre-patch, patch 7.0.3. Now in this guide I'm going to go over your talents, your spells and abilities, your stat priority, and then your single target, cleave and AoE rotations and demonstrations of each, and then just macros and add-ons you can use to help you out. Now let's go ahead and look at your talents first. In your talents, your first tier, you're going to want Roaring Blaze practically all the time. It makes your conflagrate buff your immolate on the target that it hits by 60% for the full duration or remaining duration or until you refresh it or it falls off. Now this does stack, so if you spam conflagrate twice, it gives you twice the buff. It does stack and makes it stronger, so it's not just a flat 60%. Now if the adds are dying so quickly that you can't immolate and you can't really get value out of that dot, you can use Shadowburn instead. It costs 1 soul shard, does some damage, but if the target dies within 5 seconds, then it actually gives you 2 soul shards back. So it actually generates soul shards for you if things are dying very, very quickly. Backtrap's just not really worth using at all or even considering versus these other two. Immolate's one of your biggest damage spells, especially on single target and even on cleave. So buffing it with Conflagrate is really, really big and important and way better. And Shadowburn is just a constant generation of soul shards in the case that things are dying very, very quickly. So Roaring Blaze most of the time, and then if adds are dying super quickly, like basically on Hellfire Assault, then Shadowburn. Now for level 30, Reverse Entropy is really good. You're going to want to use this pretty much all the time. It reduces the cast time of Chaos Bolt and Rain of Fire by half a second, which is quite significant. And it also restores 35% of your maximum mana every time you use these spells, meaning you never have to life tap when you're using this talent. It takes out globals from your rotation and helps you do more damage because you never have to worry about that. Now, if you do need burst AoE, Cataclysm is an excellent choice. It's a long cast time, but say you know a bunch of adds are coming down, like Zul'Harak Imps, maybe Manaroth Imps on Mythic, you can use this as long as you can use it every time that you need the burst AoE, and if the burst AoE is required about every 45 seconds, maybe a little bit longer. And you just precast it, it hits everything, does a bunch of damage in an area, and then applies Immolate to everything. So it's a really, really nice burst AoE talent. Mana Tap's not worth using at all. Consumes your mana to give you a little bit of increased damage, but the thing is, then you have to, because you don't have Reverse Entropy, you gotta life tap, and then you gotta life tap more because you're using Mana Tap, and you're sucking your mana away, and just not worth losing either the huge burst AoE or the consistent quality of life buff and reduction of cast time, which allows you to squeeze in more Chaos Bolts into Havoc, which we'll get to a little bit in the rotation section. Now in your next tier you've got Survivability versus CC. I recommend Demon Skin. It's passive, makes your shield bigger, and gets you more health regen essentially. It's really, really nice and helps you survive and tank some raid damage better. Mortal Coil doesn't heal you anymore unless the CC effect actually hits and works. So you can't just throw it at a boss or an ad that's immune to CC and get the heal. So it's pretty useless because the Horrify is not great in PvE and it only lasts 3 seconds anyway. Shadow Fury is now a casted spell. It's got a stun effect. It's an AoE stun as it was. And so if you really need it for your raid, you can use this AoE stun, but it's not great. You have to cast it, it takes away time from your DPS, and you give up a lot of survivability. Level 60, Eradication for single target and cleave is really, really good. Anytime you use your Chaos Bolt, Eradication is kind of what you want. It makes Chaos Bolt apply a debuff that lasts for a few seconds and increases your damage that you do to that target. It's really, really good. Anytime you're using Chaos Bolt, it's an excellent choice. Now for AoE, full AoE, you can use Fire and Brimstone if you want. It does just make your Incinerate kind of cleave AoE, but it's not good for burst because you can't really, well, you don't burst. It's just your filler spell that's cleaving. If you want burst AoE, you want to go with Soul Harvest, and you do want to couple this with Cataclysm. So you can Soul Harvest, and then Cataclysm in those periods of big AoE, and then the Immolate that is applied from Cataclysm also kind of synergizes nicely because Soul Harvest is increased in duration for every Immolate you have active. So for burst AoE, you can use Soul Harvest and Cataclysm rather than Eradication, even though you will be using Chaos Bolt during those fights anyway. Just things to note there. But basically Eradication almost all the time. Burst AoE, you can do Soul Harvest and Cataclysm. And then for constant AoE, Fire and Brimstone, where you don't use Chaos Bolt. Level 75, you're going to pick between movement talents and survivability. I like to default to Dark Pact. Makes you tankier, lets you mitigate the burst from certain mechanics, is off the global cooldown essentially. It's really, really nice. Burning Rush, you can use for movement, but it does suck your health away, so make sure you're not dying while you're using it, and make sure you take it off once you've gotten to your destination. If you really want, you can use Demonic Circle. It's your old teleport. You put it on the ground, and then at any point if you're in range, you can cast it again and port over there. But because you can't move it without standing in the spot that you need it to go to, it's kind of awkward to move it around during a fight if you had to. So I recommend Dark Pact normally, and Burning Rush if you really must have that movement speed. For level 90, you want Grimoire Service pretty much anytime you've got Immolate up. So in any cleave situation or single target situation, it's got nice on-demand burst, and you will want to use your Imp out of this. You do have a choice of all your pets. Imp will do you the best, and I'll explain why in your spells and abilities. Now you can use Grimoire Sacrifice in a cleave AoE heavy situation because it makes your spells kind of pulse a little AoE pulse. So it's really nice for that, especially when you can't get Immolates up to really help your imps benefit from that effect. Grimoire Supremacy just not worth using. It gets rid of your 3-minute burst cooldown, either your AoE Infernal or your single target Gym Guard. Plus you lose out on either the on-demand burst or the pulsing Grimoire Sacrifice damage. Now level 100, Soul Conduit's going to be a go-to for pretty much all situations, I would say. Not quite all situations. There are some where you will use a different talent. Definitely single target, it's your only real option. But if you have a long, big adds that last a long time, so council type fights come to mind, then Wreak Havoc can be really, really good because it allows you to basically have Havoc up all the time. You 100% uptime on Havoc if you want, and it lasts longer, so you can squeeze more spells in each Havoc without having to reapply it. So on a council type fight, this will help you essentially double your damage because you get to copy your spells over for the entire fight. But if the adds don't last that long, and you're still using Havoc, which you should be in AoE, then you don't really need this extended Wreak Havoc duration. So you can still use Soul Conduit if things are dying very quickly. But for long adds or multiple bosses in the same fight, then Wreak Havoc is really, really good. Now Channel Demon Fire is really, really bad. Not worth using single target AoE. Doesn't matter how many targets. You might as well just use a different talent. So those are your talents. Now let's go ahead and talk about your spells and abilities as a Destruction Warlock. First, I'm going to mention your pet. You do want to be using your Imp because Firebolt does extra damage if the target has Immolate on it, meaning it does a crap ton of damage because you always have Immolate up. So it's your best pet as a Destruction Warlock, which is also why you use Grimoire Imp, because it does the same effect. It's got the same buff if you're using Grimoire Service. So make sure you're using Imp and Grimoire Imp if you're using those talents. Now as far as spells themselves, you've got Conflagrate to build soul shards, and it's a guaranteed soul shard generator, so it's your only guaranteed one. Just keep that in mind, don't overcap with it, but it just does damage. Its cooldown is reduced by haste, and it has 2 charges. It's a very, very cool spell, and with Roaring Blaze, it actually increases your Immolate damage as well. Speaking of which, we've got Immolate, your dot. It's a casted dot, does a little bit of damage up front, a lot of damage as a dot over time, and then it has a chance to generate soul shards. 15% chance, but if it crits, it's 30% chance instead. And we've got Incinerate for a filler. Very simple, it's a casted spell, does damage, doesn't interact any other way. For spenders, we do have Chaos Bolt. It's a 2 soul shard spell, does a good amount of damage, and it always crits, and its damage is actually increased by crit as well. With Eradication, it also applies that debuff that makes the enemy take more damage from you. For big mass AoE, we do have Rain of Fire instead, which costs 3 soul shards, and is a casted spell, and it just does AoE damage in the area over several seconds. If you did talent into Shadowburn, you would have another spender in that. It costs 1 soul shard, does damage, and so on. And of course you have your talented spells, so Dark Pact, Grimoire Sacrifice if you had that, and so on. We do have, for Cleave, Havoc is a really important spell, and one you want to get used to using on pretty much any fight except for a pure single target fight. It marks your target with this debuff, and any spell you cast, any single target spell you cast on another target gets copied over to that target too for the duration. So for example, if you Havoc the target and then cast Immolate on another target, you would hit Immolate on both targets. Same with Conflagrate and Chaos Bolt, Shadow Burn, so on. So any single target spell gets copied. It's really, really important to learn how to use this and to get used to it as long as there's more than one target. Now, normally it has a 20-second cooldown and it lasts for 8 seconds. You can only have one up at a time. If you take Wreak Havoc, it has no cooldown and it lasts 20 seconds, so it lets you kind of have more freedom in that Havoc period of time, and you can keep it up all the time. As far as cooldowns go, we do have your Summon Doomguard, your 3-minute cooldown for single target, but if you have AoE needs, then you can use Infernal instead. They share a cooldown, so you cannot use both. You just have to pick one for the situation. We do have Battle Res, of course, from Soulstone. You can precast it on someone so they can take the Battle Res once they die, or you can save it and see who dies and then cast it after they're dead as well. We have some minor utility in Fear for CC, but we don't normally use it. And then, of course, Drain Life you won't be using as far as damage goes, but if you're really desperate to heal up, you could use that, along with your health stones, of course, that you create. And then finally, we have Life Tap, which trades your health for some mana. You don't need to use it as long as you're using Reverse Entropy, but if you're doing Burst AoE with Cataclysm, then you may need to use it just to kind of keep your mana up so you can cast spells. So those are your spells and abilities. Now let's look at your stats as a Destruction Warlock. Your top stat's going to be Haste, and what Haste does is it makes your cast faster. It also makes your Immolate tick more often, and because your Soul Shard generations are based on Immolate ticks, as well as, of course, Conflagrate, it does increase the rate of generating Soul Shards because it ticks quicker, which means you get more chances quicker to get more Soul Shards. In addition, it also reduces the cooldown of your Conflagrate, which, along with giving you more Soul Shards, because every time you use this you get one, it also increases the time that you get to double buff your Immolate with Roaring Blaze here, because it makes Conflagrate buff your Immolate damage, and it's one of your top damage spells. So Haste is really, really good for you. Now, you do have Critical Strike coming after that. It makes your Chaos Bolt stronger, and it makes you crit more often. And the damage buff to Chaos Bolt is a 1-to-1, so for every crit strike percent chance that you go up, you get 1% extra damage in your Chaos Bolt. In addition, your Immolate does have a better chance to generate Soul Shards when you crit with it, so it does help you generate more Soul Shards because of this. After crit is Versatility, just a flat damage increase, and then Mastery, and Mastery is kind of weird now. It makes your spells deal a random amount of extra damage up to whatever your Mastery level is, so it's really not ideal because you get screwed on it with RNG. So, to recap, you want Haste, then Crit, then Versatility, and then Mastery. Now, as far as gear goes, just a brief mention, your tier set bonuses and your Fragment of the Dark Star, your class trinket from Archimon, don't really influence your rotation, other than just make sure if you get free Soul Shards when your Chaos Bolt doesn't consume them with your tier set, just be aware of that. But you'll just kind of follow the same rotation. If you get too many Soul Shards, you'll use it on Chaos Bolts and such, but we'll get into that in detail in the rotation. Now let's talk about your single target rotation here. What you're going to want to do is follow a couple core concepts. The first is keep Immolate up all the time. You always want this up on your target. And after Immolate, you do want to Conflagrate as much as possible. Once at least, right away, but ideally 2 times if you have both charges or they're really close together. Because you want to double buff that Immolate for as long as possible, it does so much damage. After that, you will spend your Soul Shards on Chaos Bolt. And the way to use it is you can pull it up if you need to, say for an important ad, Bloodless Heroism, Gorfian's Feast of Souls, things like that, or other cooldowns that come up and make you do more trinket procs, etc. You can pull it up for that. But normally what you're going to want to do is spread it out so you keep your Eradication debuff up as much as possible, giving you that 12% extra damage. So try to keep the most uptime you can on Eradication. Now again, you can pull it for those important periods, but in general, try to keep that debuff rolling. And then of course use your cooldowns on cooldown. Your Summon Doomguard as much as you can, and your Summon Imp, your Grimoire Imp as well. Now of course you can save those again for big periods of damage, like Gorfian's Feast of Souls. You might not use Doomguard at the very beginning, because it's only 2 minutes until this Feast of Souls. But basically, you just keep Immolate up, Conflagrate as much as possible right after, so the sooner the better, and then spend your shards on Chaos Bolt. Now you don't want a Soul Shard cap, so if you end up with 5 Soul Shards, and you have Eradication just applied or something, you can still use Chaos Bolt to make sure you don't waste any lucky ticks of Immolate, for example, so you don't lose Soul Shards. That's really important as well. So that's your single target rotation. Then you just spam Incinerate at the end just to kind of fill the time. What's important to note is sometimes Conflagrate, you'll notice, will actually line up really nicely with Immolate. Not always, but it will, where you can get 2 charges in. And in those cases, you do want to save it up, wait for Immolate, and then double Conflagrate. Now, you don't want to wait too long, because if you wait too long on your Conflagrate and it's been sitting at 2 stacks, you're losing out on potential Soul Shard generation. So just make sure if you see the timers kind of lining up, then save it up. If not, then go ahead and use it, but always have at least 1 charge of Conflagrate for your Immolates. So I'll go ahead and show you guys on these dummies. Now, I'll discuss the opener briefly. You do want to, at 5 seconds or so, you can precast Incinerate if you're far enough from the mob, and you can get 2 of those in before the pool actually starts. So you'll pre-pot about 5 seconds, and at the same time you'll start casting Incinerate, and cast Incinerate again, and then Immolate, and then double Conflagrate, your 2 cooldowns, Doomguard, Imp, and then if you have enough Soul Shards, then you can Chaos Bolt. And then just kind of follow the rotation. So I'll show you guys now. So I'll precast Incinerate, do another one, Immolate, and then double Conflagrate, and then my 2 cooldowns, Doomguard, Imp, and I have enough here for a Chaos Bolt, so I'll go ahead and use that, and then just Incinerate to fill. And then we just kind of watch our timers here. And you notice the Conflagrate and Immolate timers are pretty close. So I'll go ahead and make sure they line up, and I don't have anything else to do anyway. So I'll Immolate here, Conflagrate twice to buff that, and then Chaos Bolt to get this Eradication going, this debuff here. And then you just spam Incinerate, and you kind of keep an eye. Now in this case, they're not really lining up that well. I will hold on to Conflagrate because I need it for the Immolate buff. So I'll Immolate again because it's coming off, and then I'll Conflagrate once. Chaos Bolt to get that buff going. And then to generate Soul Shards, I will get another Conflagrate because it's not lining up that nicely right now. I'll Chaos Bolt right now to get that Eradication buff up, and I'll save my Conflagrate for this Immolate that's about to come out. So Immolate here, Conflagrate, and now I have 5 Soul Shards, so I want to use Chaos Bolt so I don't overcap. And then just Incinerate. Now here, I only have a few seconds between Conflagrate and Immolate, so I don't mind waiting a little bit. I'll Chaos Bolt for the Eradication. I've done that a little bit earlier. But here I will refresh my Immolate, double Conflagrate so I don't hold on to it too long, and then Chaos Bolt to get this Eradication. And it's pretty much a single target rotation. Just keep doing this. Keep an eye on your timers. Now here you see it's lined up perfectly, so I'm actually going to wait on Conflagrate because Immolate is such a big part of my damage. So Immolate here, double Conflag, and then Chaos Bolts. Now I do have Imp coming up, so I'll use that, this Grimoire of Service here, and then just make sure we try to keep high uptime. And this is it, pretty much. So here, I'll refresh Immolate, Conflagrate, and then Chaos Bolt here, and I'll Conflagrate again just to generate some Soul Shards, and buff the Immolate a little bit more. And that's all you have to do, just kind of watch your cooldowns, watch your timers, make sure you do keep Chaos Bolt, the Eradication debuff, up as much as possible. Sometimes it will fall though, depending on your luck. Right now my crit's very, very low, and my haste is the highest, one of the highest stats I have, but it's also not as high as it could be, so I won't be generating as many Soul Shards as you may end up doing at higher gear levels, especially with tier sets and class trinkets. So that's your single target rotation. Now I want to discuss your Cleave / AoE Cleave rotation. And this is for basically anything where there are extra adds, more than one add, adds that spawn during the boss fight, things like that, or on a council type fight. So I'll show you guys with Wreak Havoc once the combat drops here, but if you don't use it, there's only a slight difference in how you use it, and I will get into that in the rotation. But essentially you do your single target rotation just like you were doing, and then you add in Havoc. And so you have Havoc up as much as possible, as long as there's a second target available. If you're using Wreak Havoc, you basically can use it the whole fight. It'll be up 100% of the time. Very, very good for a fight like Council. And what you'll do is you'll Havoc first, then Immolate, and then double Conflagrate, and then spam Chaos Bolts as much as possible, and then of course Incinerates after that, and just keep Havoc up all the time on the target that you're using it on. If you're using Wreak Havoc, it lasts 20 seconds, so you don't have to refresh it too often. Now, if you're not using Wreak Havoc, because the adds don't last that long, you still want to use Havoc, but it'll only last 8 seconds, and it does have a cooldown. And what you'll do is, rather than casting Havoc and then casting Immolate, you're going to actually cast Immolate on both the targets. So, say Valhalla, you'll cast the Immolate on her, cast the Immolate on the add, and then Havoc the add, or per whichever you're not hitting. So Havoc then, and then double Conflagrate into Chaos Bolts. Now if your haste is high enough, you can squeeze 2 Chaos Bolts in, given that you have enough shards, and you can pull up for this purpose. If you don't have high enough haste, you won't be able to get both Chaos Bolts in, but it's basically the same concept. You just Havoc as much as possible, and then use your Conflagrates, use your Chaos Bolts as much as you can, just to get the most damage out of it. So you just add that Havoc into the rotation. And how you use it just kind of depends a little bit on whether you take Wreak Havoc or not. So again, if the adds are dying very quickly, don't bother. But if they're lasting a long time, say on Council, or if your group isn't killing the adds very quickly, then Wreak Havoc can do a lot for you damage. So I'll go ahead and show you guys with Wreak Havoc. Just remember, if you're not using it, then you want to make sure that you are indeed casting Immolate on both targets before you Havoc. One final note, your Chaos Bolt, you want to use Chaos Bolt pretty much in these situations, anything where there's adds that come up now and again, but isn't full AoE, where you can get your Immolate value. If there are periods, say on like Archimon in Phase 2, where they come out, when all the adds come out and group up, then you can use Rain of Fire rather than Chaos Bolt, but then resume using Chaos Bolt once the adds die, and you're down to just 1 or 2 targets, or 3 targets. So it'll be the same opener, and I won't go, it's the same thing, you'll Incinerate a couple times, and then in this case with Wreak Havoc, you would Havoc, and then Immolate, and so on, and then kind of go the same rotation, and use your cooldowns. Now I won't use the cooldowns here, just remember that you do use that in the opener. So precast some Incinerates, a couple Incinerates, and then because I'm using Wreak Havoc, I'll Havoc first, Immolates, double Conflagrate, and then Chaos Bolts. And I can try to squeeze 2 in now, my haste is pretty low. Because I have Wreak Havoc, it will use both of those, and that'll be a good opening burst. And then at this point, you basically do the same thing, except you just add Havoc in. So I notice my Immolate's coming out, so I'll Havoc, Immolate, double Conflagrate, and then Chaos Bolt as much as possible. Again, if you're using Soul Conduit instead, you can make sure you cast Immolate on both targets before you actually use your Havoc. At this point, again, I'll make sure my Havoc is refreshed, get Immolate up on both, Conflagrate as much as possible, and then again, if you need to burst them down, then use as many Chaos Bolts as you want in a row. If you're not, then just keep your Eradication buff going as often as possible, rather than spamming it all the time. And that's pretty much your Cleave Rotation. Now, if there were a lot of adds, you'd still Havoc, get your Immolates rolling on the important adds, Conflagrate, and then maybe instead of Chaos Bolting just a bunch of adds, you could Rain of Fire. Now with 3, it's not quite enough. You're talking maybe 4 or 5 plus that you would do this, but I just wanted to show you guys so you kind of see that. And then just Chaos Bolt when there are less targets. Keep your Havoc rolling, get your Immolate up, Conflagrate, and now I don't have another Conflagrate, so I'll just Chaos Bolt instead, and then Conflagrate's up, and I'll use that again. So that's with Wreak Havoc. Now, without Wreak Havoc, you don't have Havoc up as often, so again, you would Immolate this guy, Immolate that guy, then Havoc, and then double Conflagrate into Chaos Bolts as much as possible. Now again, you can space out your Chaos Bolts if you're not trying to burst them down. So in Council, for example, you're not going to burst them down instantly. But if you have, say, Heroism, Ring Popped, and so on, then you could spam as many Chaos Bolts as possible just to get the most damage, the most burst damage as you could. So that's your Cleave Rotation, Cleave/AoE. If you need to use Rain of Fire because there are a lot of adds, that's fine. But up to 3 at least, Chaos Bolt will do really, really well because of Eradication, and it always crits, so it practically does more damage than Rain of Fire at 3, although Rain of Fire, if it always crit, would do more. Once you get to like 4, 5, 6 adds all the time, which doesn't happen very often in Hellfire Citadel, then you can use Rain of Fire instead of Chaos Bolt. Now, the last situation I'm going to talk about is a really weird AoE situation in which things aren't lasting long enough to have an Immolate do anything for you. And essentially I'm just talking about Hellfire Assault. It's the only thing I can think of, the only time I can think of in which you would use this kind of setup. So because Immolate's not worth it, because things aren't lasting long enough, you'll use Shadowburn instead, because if you don't have Immolate, Roaring Blaze is worthless. In addition, you will use Reverse Entropy still, because you'll be using Rain of Fire, and you will use Fire and Brimstone for consistent AoE rather than Eradication, because you don't Chaos Bolt, because its cast time is so long and things are dying too quickly. So if you don't Chaos Bolt, there's no reason to have this talent. Now I picked Fire and Brimstone here and Reverse Entropy for more consistent AoE, because I don't know if the burst lines up that well in Hellfire Assault with the 45-second and 2-minute cooldown timers. So you might miss out on good opportunities, plus the cast time is huge on Cataclysm. So you may things literally might die in that cast time because it's such an easy fight and things have such low health. As far as your level 90 talent, I'm going to go with Sacrifice because your imp doesn't benefit from your immolate damage anymore, and this will get you pulsing AoE instantly, and since your imp has a cast time, that means it could get clipped off. It's starting to cast a firebolt on something and then it dies and has to retarget something and recast, so it's just not great. So then you would just sacrifice it, make sure you do have that buff, doesn't fall off or anything. And then in your last talent, you have a choice here. You can go Wreak Havoc, not for the increased Havoc timer, but more for the reduced cooldown or removal of the cooldown actually, so that you can apply Havoc all the time. Or you can go Soul Conduit just for the chance at getting free soul shards, although it's not so relevant because you'll be generating so many with Shadowburn and things dying all the time. Just as a note, you can use Shadowburn on multiple targets if you know they're all going to die, because it does apply that debuff, and as long as they die within 5 seconds, you will get your extra soul shards. So basically what you're going to do, and I'll kind of show you guys with Wreak Havoc, but again, it's pretty much the same idea, is you want to Havoc things on cooldown, and you want to use Conflagrate to build up soul shards. Now after that, you want to spend them generally on Rain of Fire when you have enough, but make sure you're shadow burning any low health targets that are about to die, so that you're generating a bunch of soul shards. So you'll generate soul shards with Conflagrates and Shadow Burns, killing things, and then spend it on Rain of Fire. And then Havoc on cooldown. Now instead of your Doomguard, you will be spending that cooldown shard on Summon Infernal instead. It's a little hard to demonstrate here because I can't kill anything of these dummies, and so you won't see that soul shard generation, but I'll kind of give you a rough idea, and then you'll see kind of how that would work. So what you do, pretty much the same thing. You'd start the fight, spam some Incinerates, a couple Incinerates, and then just Havoc something, Conflagrate, and kind of off to the races with your cooldown, and then Shadowburn if things are about to die already, which they tend to do on that fight, and then Rain of Fire if you have enough. I'll kind of show you both, so that you get an idea of how it looks. So, a couple Incinerates, Havoc here, double Conflagrate, I'll drop my Infernal as a cooldown, and then just kind of Incinerate. Now I would Shadowburn at a low health add, and then just let it die. And here I'll show you Rain of Fire. If you had enough soul shards, you can cast Rain of Fire in a big group, and then as things come up, you would then Shadowburn them if you get soul shards, and just kind of do damage that way. Now, because I have Havoc, I could just keep this up the whole time and be spamming stuff into it. Incinerate doesn't really do that much with it because it already copies with Fire and Brimstone, but for Conflagrate and Shadowburn, it does do a lot. And this is pretty much what you would do. You would generate a lot more soul shards. Obviously, things aren't dying, like I said, but then Rain of Fire when you have a lot of soul shards and there's a big group, and then otherwise just keep Havoc up as much as possible, Shadowburn for damage, and generating soul shards. So that's pretty much that really weird specific situation we have right now, and pretty much just for Hellfire Assault. You do a decent amount of damage, and you don't have to use Immolate pretty much ever, except maybe on Martok, but even she dies really, really quickly in that fight. So that's it for your rotations, your 3 different kinds of rotations. Now, as far as macros and add-ons go, I don't use any macros because there's not really anything worth macroing together, in my opinion. But if you have any ideas or any questions on how to make certain macros, feel free to ask. Now, as far as add-ons go, I do use weak auras to track a lot of my stuff for the single target cleave rotation type stuff. I've got an immolate tracker for the timer, so I know when it's coming off. Same thing for eradicate. Eradication, I do want to know when that debuff is coming off in case I need to extend it. And then I've got cooldown trackers for Summon Doomguard, which again shares the cooldown with Infernal, so you can use it for both. A tracker for Grimoire of Service for Imp specifically. And then a cooldown and stack tracker for my Conflagrate, because sometimes you want to know not just, oh, when's it coming up on the next stack, but how many stacks do I have? So you can see, can I do a double Conflagrate, or do I need to just spend one now so I don't waste potential soul shard generation? You could also use Havoc if you wanted, although generally you won't be targeting the ad that has Havoc, so it may not be as useful. You might want to use a cooldown timer for it or something like that. And that's what I use right now for weak auras for Destro. So that's it for this video. If you liked the video, feel free to hit it with a like. If you'd like to see more videos like this in the future, especially come Legion, feel free to subscribe to the channel and let me know what you think in the comments, ask any questions, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks for watching, guys. Cheers.